All right, welcome back, everyone. You're looking at live pictures, Arlington National Cemetery. That, of course, is the eternal flame. It was lit to honor the life of President John F. Kennedy.
He was assassinated 50 years ago. We're remembering his life throughout the day here on CNN. It's an emotional place to be on any day, but especially today, 50 years later. Good morning, everyone. I'm Christine Romans.
And I'm John Berman. We are at the bottom of the hour right now.
The Bodyguard. Piers talks to Clint Hill, the last surviving passenger of President Kennedy's limousine as it raced to Parkland Hospital. Piers Morgan Live, tonight at 9 on CNN.
All right, so moving on now. It has been locked up and hidden from the public. How the pink suit that Jackie Kennedy wore the day that John F. Kennedy was assassinated, how it won't be made public for 100 years.
This, as we remember JFK's life 50 years since his assassination on CNN today. Today, First Lady Jackie Kennedy dressed up in a bright pink suit as she accompanied her husband on what would be a fateful trip to Dallas. Now that suit is an iconic image of President John F. Kennedy's assassination. It's a symbol not only of what happened in Dallas, but also of her grace in the face of unspeakable tragedy.
CNN's Randy Kay has more on where that suit is now.
In the words of President John F. Kennedy, she looked smashing in it, which may be why the president asked Jackie Kennedy to wear her now famous watermelon pink suit to Dallas on November 22nd, 1963.
The usual welcoming committee presents Mrs. Kennedy with a bouquet of red roses.
It looked like Coco Chanel, but her suit was actually a knockoff, made in America. The First Lady had worn it at least 6 times before that fateful day. Here she is in 1962 awaiting the arrival of the Prime Minister of Algeria. That's John Jr. in her arms. In Dallas on November 22nd at this Fort Worth Chamber of Commerce breakfast, the president even joked about his wife's fashion sense.
Nobody wonders what Lyndon and I wear.
Later that day, President Kennedy would be dead, and the First Lady's stunning pink suit, stained forever with her husband's blood, would begin a long and mysterious journey. When aides suggested she change her clothes after the shooting, she refused. Philip Sheenan wrote a book about the Kennedy assassination.
Her remark, and I think she made it more than once, is, "No, I'm going to leave these clothes on. I want them to see what they have done."
Hours later, Mrs. Kennedy continued to wear the suit during the emergency swearing in of Lyndon Johnson as president.
That whole scene is obviously just surreal. She arrives in the cabin in Air Force One in these clothes covered with the president's blood and expected to stand there and witness the swearing in of her husband's successor.
Mrs. Kennedy was still in her suit when she arrived later that evening at Andrews Air Force Base in Maryland, where she received her husband's body. The president's brother at her side in the middle of the night. Once at the White House, her personal maid put the suit in a bag so Mrs. Kennedy wouldn't have to look at it. Then, sometime in 1964, the bloodstained suit arrived here at the National Archives building in the nation's capital. It came in a box along with a handwritten note from Jackie Kennedy's mother on her personal stationery. It read simply, "Jackie's suit and bag, worn November 22nd, 1963. All this time, Mrs. Kennedy's pink suit has been forbidden from public view and will likely stay that way for a very long time. In 2003, after her mother's death, Caroline Kennedy gave the suit to the people of the United States with the understanding that it wouldn't be put on public display for 100 years until 2103. And even then, the Kennedy family must be consulted before any attempt is made to display the suit, all in effort to avoid sensationalizing that horrible act. And it's believed only a handful of people, maybe only as few as 2, have seen the suit since. Along with the suit, and also hidden from view in the new archives in Maryland, the blue blouse Mrs. Kennedy wore in Dallas, her stockings, blue shoes, and blue purse. What they don't have is the First Lady's pink pillbox hat.
The hat is a mystery. The hat apparently goes to the Secret Service initially, and the Secret Service turns it over to Mrs. Kennedy's private secretary, and then it disappears. It has not been seen since.
The archive is making every effort to preserve the suit. It's stored in a windowless vault, in an acid-free container where the air is changed every 20 minutes or so, to properly maintain the woolen cloth. It is kept at a temperature of 65 to 68 degrees, which is best for the fabric. The suit story? A perfect ending for a First Lady who craved privacy after so much pain. Randy Kay, CNN, Los Angeles.
God, those last bright moments of American history, and then it was dark and gray for a very long time.
Such an indelible image. We'll continue to remember JFK throughout the day as we mark 50 years since the assassination. Do not forget to watch our documentary, The Assassination of President Kennedy. That starts tonight at 10 o'clock right here on CNN. Everyone across this country remembering the moment when President John F. Kennedy was shot and killed 50 years ago today. Flags at half-staff this hour. This a picture of the White House live right now.
And for the first time ever, Dallas, the city of Dallas, will officially commemorate the assassination. This afternoon, the bells will toll at Dealey Plaza. Then at the exact moment of the shooting, 1:30 Eastern Time, there will be a moment of silence.
Meanwhile, at Arlington National Cemetery, a wreath laying at the grave site of JFK. That, of course, is the eternal flame still burning. And today, CNN has a new snapshot about how Americans today are remembering the president.
A new CNN ORC poll shows he has a 90% approval rating today among people, far higher than any other president in the last half of the century.
Obviously, still people still hold him very close to their hearts. So let's go live to Dallas right now, where a lot of the activity will go on today. CNN's Ed Lavandera is there. Good morning, Ed.
Good morning, guys. Well, the ceremony is expected to start here in about 2.5 hours, and already we're seeing the crowd beginning to fill up. 5,000 invited people. You have to have a ticket to get into Dealey Plaza today. All the streets surrounding Dealey Plaza cordoned off for this ceremony. Officially, it is the first time the city of Dallas has gone through this official ceremony commemorating this day. And city officials are quick to point out that what they don't want this day to be about is the way President Kennedy was assassinated here on the streets of Dallas. They want this to be a celebration of his life. But as the sound checks have been going on in preparations for today's event, I was talking a little while ago about how surreal it is. You're seeing these images playing out on these large screens out here in Dealey Plaza, images of Camelot, the video images of John Kennedy and Jacqueline Onassis and their families. So there's incredible archival photographs that are playing here just feet away from where President Kennedy was assassinated on Elm Street. We are standing over it just in the shadows of the 6th floor window. But this is a ceremony that will take place. We will hear from the mayor of Dallas, and then we will also hear from historian David McCullough, who will read excerpts of speeches that President Kennedy gave over the course of his life. And then there will be a moment of silence, and bells will toll across the city of Dallas. And then, interestingly enough, there will be a new monument dedicated here in memory of John Kennedy as well. And it will be inscribed with the final paragraph, John and Christine, of the speech he was on his way to give here in Dallas that afternoon. A speech where there was a room full of people waiting for the president to arrive November 22nd, 1963. And it was actually just the motorcade whizzed past that building because he had been shot, and Parkland Hospital was just past the trademark building where he was supposed to give that speech. They had to race to the emergency room as doctors tried to save his life. But that monument that will be dedicated here today will have the last paragraph of the speech that he was supposed to give that day.
And there was so much shock, really, and horror inside that room when they heard that the president would not be coming because of what happened. And today's a really important day in many ways for Dallas. As you said, it's the first official commemoration of this day, and you noted they wanted to be about President Kennedy's life. It's been a strange last few days in some ways, though, in Dallas. Protests at this site where you're standing right now yesterday.
Yeah, we saw a little bit of that yesterday. You know, what's interesting here is that on the grassy knoll, which is just off to my right over here, this is where conspiracy theorists, and this is what I think might still surprise a lot of people. People from around the world, John, still flock here. And even they come here and you see them every day standing on these streets. They look up at the 6th floor window. It's almost as if they're just trying to imagine what it must have been like to be here that day. But on November 22nd, every year, mostly conspiracy theorists, they gather on and they observe their own moments of silence. They're not allowed in this area today. In fact, just in in the streets that are cordoned off. A lot of these folks will be getting together. And as we've talked about, how the polling showing how popular President Kennedy still is today, a lot of that polling, same polling, still also suggests that the majority of Americans don't believe that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. So a lot of those people in the area today, but they will not be part of the official ceremony that we see here this afternoon.
All right, thank you so much. Ed Lavendera in Dallas today. And of course, CNN will have live coverage of the events when they begin. These events start sometime in the noon hour today. And tonight, CNN brings you a film that puts you on the ground as the shooting happened. It really looks at the whole controversy that Ed was talking about that still surrounds the president's death and the report from the Warren Commission. You can watch The Assassination of President Kennedy. It begins tonight at 10 o'clock Eastern.
All right.
For millions of Americans, it was a moment that has consumed us for half a century. It changed us, cut at our sense of safety and hopefulness, and none more so than those who were in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963. People gathered at Dealey Plaza who witnessed the shooting, or at Parkland Hospital, who tried to save the unsavable life of the president. That dramatic, intense scene was the basis for the recent movie, Parkland.
Doctor. Doctor.
Who's the attending?
Dr. Perry. He's on his way.
Hey! We need help here!
It is just you.
Do something!
Doctor. It is President.
I know who it is.
Joining me now is Phyllis Hall, who was a nurse at Parkland Memorial Hospital and was in the ER with President Kennedy after he was shot. Good morning. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
You were 28 years old at the time. You just happened to be in the ER. You were actually on your lunch break that day. When did you first learn it was President Kennedy who had been brought in?
We got the call about 6 minutes before the people started arriving. And I walked over to the outer door to see what all the commotion was about, and saw different people that I knew, such as the Dallas mayor, Vice President Johnson, Governor Conley, and then I saw the stretcher coming in, and all I could see was a gentleman was laying on the stretcher, and a lady in pink was pretty much shielding his head and his shoulder area. Right after that, a gentleman came in front of me and said they needed my help back there, and he guided me back towards Trauma 1. As soon as I walked in, of course, I knew it was President Kennedy, and at that point, I just shut the emotions off, because that's what you do when you work in an emergency
But
room
you were
like
actually,
that,
as I understand it, Phyllis, you had his head in your hands. You were cradling, essentially, John F. Kennedy. Is that right?
No, that's not true.
No?
No.
What was your
No,
role inside that
was-
emergency room?
I walked over to the table. I saw it was the president, and so to me, he was dead on arrival. He was very cyanotic, which is a blue-gray color that occurs after you die, and it was deepening around his mouth. So I immediately started feeling for pulses in his neck and here in the wrist and down by his feet. Was not able to detect any pulses at that time.
I can't even
His
imagine.
eyes were
Obviously, that's what you all do in an emergency room. I mean, you're used to dealing with life and death situations. But this is the President
Yes, that's
of the
correct.
United States. Did you feel like, at least in the way everyone was able to handle the situation, that they were able to do what you said you were able to do, which is shut off those emotions, which seems so hard for those of us who don't work in those kinds of situations to imagine?
Well, you cannot be effective or help somebody if you're going to be emotional, and that's just kind of a trait that people that choose the emergency room have. It didn't make any difference if he was out of the slums of Dallas, or, as was the truth, he was the President of the United States. He was going to get the best care that we could give him, and hopefully at some point we might be able to detect one little sign of life, which we were not able to do.
There is another scene in the movie Parkland about the decision to move the body and have the autopsy done in Washington instead of in Dallas. I just want to play that little clip if I can.
Move it out. You understand? The Dallas police is here to execute the laws of the state of Texas. Screw the lid on that coffin now. Let it go. Let's go.
Did you see or hear what was going on at that moment? And do you think we might know more about the death of John F. Kennedy if the medical examiner there was allowed to keep and study the body? Because so many conspiracy theories have grown up just around the fact that his body was moved before there was an autopsy.
Well, it's a law in Texas that if you die under circumstances as this, that an autopsy must be performed. And so it's my understanding that the pathologist who did the autopsy was just a straightforward pathologist. And Parkland has always had the best of forensic pathologists who receive more training than just a regular pathologist would have. So they're more knowledgeable about suspicious deaths, gunshot wounds, the trajectories that the bullets travel in the body. And so I really think that it would have been very advantageous had a forensic pathologist had done the autopsy, but that didn't happen.
Phyllis Hull, who was in the ER with President John F. Kennedy, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us.
You're welcome.
And everyone asked the question, of course, where were you when President Kennedy was shot? Compelling stories from Senator Pat Leahy, among others, coming up. And MSNBC.com will be streaming NBC's coverage of the assassination of JFK as it happened, starting today at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Incredibly powerful footage.
A flash from Dallas. 2 priests who were with President Kennedy say he is dead of bullet wounds. This is the latest information we have from Dallas. We are, of course, standing by to give you all available information as it comes to us. I will repeat with the greatest regret this flash. 2 priests who were with President Kennedy say he has died of bullet wounds. A flash